just
That is
said.
the sinful will.
Right. Think about what you just said. Those who refuse to submit. Do you not understand the gravity of that? Already. It's about control. It's about manipulation of the masses. That's it. You are not supposed to have questions. You're not supposed to improve your understanding.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Grab a seat because this one is a real heavyweight clash of worldviews. Today we're sitting in on a conversation between Aron Ra, one of the sharpest voices in the atheist community, and Christian apologist Randall Rouser, and it gets right to the bone of the whole thing. Whether eternity really comes down to what a person believes, or what they actually do. Rauser tries to soften the doctrine, reframe the judgment, and explain away the hard edges. Aron Ra keeps pulling it back to one stubborn question that the apologetics just cannot shake. Stick with me all the way through, because the turning point doesn't come where you'd expect. It sneaks up in the back half, and you don't want to walk in halfway and miss how it lands. Before we get rolling, drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you're tuning in from. I love seeing how far this channel reaches, and I read every single one. All right, enough from me. Let's get into it.
So we're going to be judged permanently, forever, heaven or hell, the ultimate carrot and stick, based entirely, solely on what we believe, right?
No, I mean, I just said no, that's not correct.
But that's what the Bible says. You have to believe.
That is,
so how do we take the Bible seriously?
Where does the Bible say that?
Where does the Bible say that?
Yes.
So when Jesus says that if you don't, if you have to acknowledge him, violate the very first commandment, by the way, you have to acknowledge him as being before God. He's the gateway to God. And if you don't do that,
God? What do you mean?
Of course.
He existed before God?
No. He put in the first commandment, God says there are no other gods before me. And then Jesus positions himself as the gateway to God, which is a violation of the very first commandment.
Why would that be a violation? He says he's the gate you're referring to in the book.
Right.
John?
You can't. No one comes to the Father but through me.
John 14:6.
So yeah. Jesus has positioned himself as someone who is before God.
Also, but two things. First of all, of course, is Jesus himself divine is one question, which of course Christians believe. He's the second person of the Trinity. The other thing, of course, though, is that even if you're a Unitarian, right, you don't believe that Jesus is divine like the Father. That's not a contradiction of the first commandment that God the Father used a mediator. So it's just a non sequitur.
But you still, no one comes to the Father but through me. That puts Jesus ahead of God.
No, it puts Jesus as the chosen mediator to the Father.
Exactly what I just said with different words.
Okay. I don't think that's an issue. I mean, he is the mediator. Paul says in 1 Timothy, we have one mediator between God and
So the first commandment is saying there is no mediator. There is no one before God.
I'm not saying that.
Okay.
That's not what it's saying.
All right.
Oh, but let's segue back to evil and suffering and so on. Okay. So
I mean, I was going to get to the point about why we are judged at all, but then you say we're not judged. So I don't want to straw man your position.
That people are judged simply by what they believe. That's what you're saying.
What is okay? Is there a judgment?
Yes, there's a judgment.
Okay, based on what?
The judgment is based upon whether people are choosing to be in relationship with God, the source of all life and goodness, or not.
So we're being judged over whether we make this assumption.
What judgment is, what I would understand judgment to be, is that judgment is the consequences of one's own actions.
So it's not, it's actions, not belief.
Well, actions, certainly belief and actions can go together, right? But for example, in Romans 1, Paul, in Romans 1-3, talks about the universal sinfulness of all humanity, right? That's his point, is everybody has fallen, Jew and Gentile, we're all alienated from God. And one of the language he uses in Romans 1 is that God gave them over. Now, this is passive language. What God is doing is because people want to act in a way that is self-destructive to their nature, God allows them to do that. It's kind of like the kid who's insisting, I'm going to smoke a cigarette, and his mom lets him smoke a cigarette and then experience the consequences of that. It's the same. That's the same kind of idea.
Okay, so I thought these might come in handy because I thought it might be relevant, but it seems that there is a judgment and that it's based entirely on what you do or don't believe, not actions, belief.
So what do you want to quote? Just go ahead and quote something for me.
You have to, let me phrase it a different way. You can be forgiven for any sin if you but believe. But if you don't believe, then it doesn't matter whether you're a good or bad person, because the only sin that will not be forgiven is the sin of disbelief, as according to the 3 quotes on my t-shirt.
This is the trap, and Aron Ra walks straight into the center of it on purpose. The entire model gets framed as the ultimate carrot and stick, eternity decided by what you happen to believe. And the second Randall Rouser tries to soften it, watch how fast the contradiction surfaces. Here's what grabs me. Randall Rouser leans on Jesus as the mediator, the chosen path to the Father. Aron Ra fires back with something devastating in how simple it is. He points out that Randall just restated the exact same claim using different words. That's the part people miss. When you have to keep rephrasing a position to make it sound less like a problem, the position never actually changed. Dressing up an idea is not defending it. And then comes the line that matters most. Aron Ra plants his flag on a principle I think is just obviously correct. Judgment should be the consequence of your actions, not your beliefs. You have to understand why that is so powerful. A kind person who got the metaphysics wrong and a cruel person who guessed the right password cannot possibly deserve the same fate. If they do, the system was never measuring goodness, it was measuring obedience. Then watch Randall Rouser try to wriggle out with the cigarette analogy. The kid who insists on smoking while the parent steps back and lets him face the fallout. I get why it sounds gentle, but it quietly assumes the very thing it is supposed to prove. It treats plain disbelief as self-harm, as if doubting a claim is the same as lighting a cigarette. And here's a fact worth knowing. The idea of Jesus as the second person of the Trinity was not obvious to anyone in the Gospels. It was argued out by church councils centuries later, most famously at Nicaea in 325. So when this gets handed to us as the plain meaning, history quietly disagrees.
Okay,
so you have to believe whatever the clergy
the unforgivable
are
sin you're
you.
referring to. Okay, so let me talk about one parable of Jesus and then come back to the unforgivable sin, if I may. Okay, so the parable of Jesus, of the sheep and the goats in Matthew 25. Here he says, at the end of the age, there will be these 2 different groups, sheep and goats. And then he goes on to define how you distinguish sheep and the goats. It is how they responded to others, right? Did you clothe me when I was naked? Did you feed me when I was hungry? Did you visit me when I was in prison, and so on? Some people will think that they were sheep, and in fact, they turn out to be goats, and he will say, I never knew you. Others are going to be surprised. And so one of the interesting things there, which Jesus loves to do, is he loves to challenge people who are sort of self-satisfied in their righteousness, saying, don't be so sure where you're at. And the way that he defines it there is all about action, what you do, how you live your life. Now, you want to talk about the unforgivable sin. What is the unforgivable sin?
Let's look at the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, let's look at the context. So in the context, for example, in Mark 3, Jesus has just healed someone. And what the Jewish leaders that are opposing him begin to suggest is that he is able to do good. He's able to heal people because the devil is doing that through him. And so then he warns them about blaspheming the Holy Spirit. The meaning of what he is saying there in response in the literary context to those individuals is that people who refuse to submit and recognize truth that is right in front of them, they will suffer the consequences of that.
Think about what you just said.
That is the sinful will.
Right. Think about what you just said. Those who refuse to submit. Do you not understand the gravity of that? Already. It's about control. It's about manipulation of the masses. That's it. You are not supposed to have questions. You're not supposed to improve your understanding. There is nothing about the judgment that would allow anybody a means of rehabilitation or improvement of their situation. No, you get eternity to pre-exist according to some religious beliefs, and then you get this momentary glimpse where you exist, and for that you get the entirety of eternity again, where you are going to be judged, damned or saved, and the saving part is arguably a damnation as well, all based on this one momentary glimpse where by our terms and our perspective, we would say that you didn't have sufficient ability to make that determination. And in fact, all of this, if we include original sin on this, is based on judgment of people who literally didn't have the knowledge of right and wrong, and therefore shouldn't be held accountable for the decision that they made. I don't see, and I'm waiting for you to, I will offer you an opportunity to give me a redeeming feature, but I don't see a redeeming feature in Christianity.
think you might be on mute, Randall.
There we are. All right. So Paul, I mentioned Romans 1-3 earlier. He talks about in Romans chapter 2, verses 12 and following, each individual is judged based upon the light that they've been given. And so he's contrasting their Gentiles to Jews. Gentiles acting with the law, like a moral law that is written on their hearts. Jews acting in accord with the law that God gave them through supernatural revelation. Each is judged according to the law they've been given. So God's not holding people responsible for information for which they did not have access. So that's sort of the first thing.
So all of the quotes on my shirt are wrong. You can still be forgiven even if you don't believe.
This is the moment the whole thing cracks open. Randall Rouser describes the unforgivable sin as people who refuse to submit and recognize the truth in front of them. And Aron Ra does not blink. He turns it straight back. That language of submission is the entire tell. It is about control. It is about not being allowed to ask questions or improve your understanding. You have to understand why that lands so hard. The instant a worldview makes refusing to submit the worst possible crime, it has stopped being about truth. Truth does not need your submission. Truth survives every question you throw at it. Gravity does not care whether you bow to it. The things that demand loyalty before evidence are usually the things that cannot win on evidence alone. And here's what people don't realize about the sheep and the goats. Randall Rouser actually uses that parable to argue judgment is about what you do, how you treated the hungry, the stranger, the imprisoned. I agree that is a far better standard, but notice he cannot keep both stories straight. 1 minute judgment is about action, the next it is about submission and belief. You cannot run both engines at once and pretend they are the same machine. Then comes the line that should stop every believer in their tracks. Aron Ra says plainly that he is waiting for one redeeming feature in Christianity, and he does not see it. That is not an insult, that is a challenge. He is saying, show me the part that makes this just, and I will listen, and the knockout is quiet. After all the verses, Randall Rouser admits judgment depends on the light a person was given, and that no one is held responsible for what they could not access. Aron Ra catches it instantly. Every claim on his shirt about belief being the deciding factor just collapsed. You can be forgiven even without belief. The apologist conceded the whole premise without noticing.
You can be forgiven as long as you want to be forgiven. Jesus.
Well, what if you don't believe?
Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew. Okay, Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, he uses this language of weeping and gnashing of teeth, and where he talks about there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's language that he uses several times. The Greek word there for gnashing entails or implies anger and hatred. So it's another place where a similar word, brucho, is used is in Acts 7:54, where the Jewish leaders gnashed their teeth at Stephen because they didn't like what he was saying. They're really angry. And so this idea of gnashing is of people who are really angry and refusing to submit. So the point Jesus is making there is that those who end up alienated from God are those who refuse to have anything to do with God. And because of that, as C.S. Lewis famously said, the gates of hell are locked on the inside, that those who don't want to be a part of God's kingdom will not be a part of God's kingdom, because God's not going to strong arm anybody. But it's not simply about a matter of, you missed this, you didn't believe this thing you're supposed to believe. It's a question of, do people want a relationship with God or not?
I'm sorry, I don't find that any more valid than when William Lane Craig says that when those who reject God, that we do it not because of a lack of evidence, we do it because we love sin. That's not a valid explanation. You're talking about people that don't want a relationship with God. Well, what about people who want a relationship, not necessarily just with God, but with whatever is truth? And we find there is no truth to any religious belief, and that's a problem. And so we're going to be judged for that. Now, you say there's no heaven or hell. What is the judgment then?
I never said that.
You said there was no damnation, which heaven and hell, both.
I said that what Jesus defines damnation as, in terms of weeping and gnashing of teeth, is people who are choosing their own alienation from God. They don't want to be a part of God or his kingdom.
Okay, so that's not a damnation. I would happily accept that option. As a matter of fact, I prayed to God for that option when I was a child.
Yeah, I don't know what option you prayed for, but I will say this, just to clarify, this isn't Bon Scott singing Highway to Hell, which I'm kind of tempted to break into here because I can do a pretty good Bon Scott imitation. But this is this is more like a person who's just deciding to inflict misery upon themselves. It's not a pleasant thing. It's not a happy thing. And
that's the William Lane Craig argument again.
No,
But
it's
we're
not.
not that way. We're not inflicting misery. If you love truth, if truth and improving your understanding matters to you more than anything else, then you would not let yourself be deceived by things that are not evidently true.
Let me break down why the ending is the strongest part of this entire exchange. Randall Rouser reaches for the famous line that the gates of hell are locked on the inside. The idea that nobody is dragged to damnation, people simply choose it. And here's a piece of history worth knowing. That image comes from C.S. Lewis in a book he published in 1945 called The Great Divorce. It is a beautiful sentence. It is also doing a lot of sneaky work because it reframes a person walking away from a claim they find unconvincing as someone slamming a door on paradise. Aron Ra refuses to accept that framing, and this is the part that blows my mind. He names the exact trick, the same one used when apologists argue people reject God not from lack of evidence, but because they secretly love sin. Aron Ra says flatly that this is not a valid explanation, and he is right. It is a thought-terminating move. It lets the believer skip the hard question by pre-deciding that everyone who disagrees is just morally broken. That is not a defense. That is a way to never have to defend anything. Then he flips the entire board. Randall Rouser keeps insisting this is about whether people want a relationship with God. Aron Ra answers with the thing I wish more people would say out loud. What about the people who want a relationship with truth, wherever it leads? People who looked honestly, wanted it to be real, and found no good reason to believe it was. Under this system, those people get punished for their integrity, for refusing to lie to themselves, and that is where he lands the closer, and it is clean. Aron Ra says that if truth and improving your understanding matter to you more than anything else, you will not let yourself be deceived by things that are not evidently true. Sit with that. He is not attacking faith out of spite. He is saying honesty has a cost, and he is willing to pay it. That is not a man inflicting misery on himself. That is a man who refuses to pretend. And here is my honest take watching this back today. The strongest position in this whole conversation was never the one with the most verses. It was the one asking the simplest question, is it true? Everything else is decoration. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.